Okay, so I know you're expecting my full review of episode 27 of the Thousand Year Blood War arc anime, the first episode of part 3, and it is coming very soon, I promise. But as I was writing the review, I reached the section regarding what appears to be the very first appearance of Uryu's Quincy Vollständig, and realised that I just had to talk about that right now. I've basically put the entire review on hold just to discuss this scene in particular because it feels like such a big deal to me. And it is a big deal. Uryu having a Quincy holy form is something many of us predicted would happen in the past, particularly when the trailers for Part 3 started to roll around, but the fact that we seemingly saw it as early as episode 1 is both shocking and very exciting. And so in this probably fairly brief video, I wanted to shine the spotlight on this moment in particular before diving into the complete episode itself in the days to come. The matter of Uryu's Vollständig has been stirring up a lot of conversation, debate, and theories among the community, and so I wanted to wade in and lend my perspective to matters as well. Is this actually Uryu's Vollständig that we're witnessing here? How did he activate it? And crucially, what does it mean for the future of the character and the story itself? Well, no more waiting around, let's find out. If you enjoyed this video by the time you're done with it, and you want to stay up to date with the channel for more videos to come, particularly throughout the run of the Thousand Year Blood War Arc Part 3, make sure to hit subscribe right now, as it really does help, and I really do appreciate the support as well. And yes, there will be some spoilers for the Thousand Year Blood War Arc in the video to come. Now, I feel a need to reiterate at the start of this video that Uryu having even a semblance of a Vollständig is something that was never in the source material. People wanted to see it, sure, but it never happened, and frankly, it never even came close to happening. This is already, then, I would argue, one of the biggest changes the anime has made, and of course, I'm all for it. Certainly, I can't help but think that Uryu's final battle of the arc is going to look considerably different already. But it's also not like the idea of Uryu having a Vollständig came completely out of the blue either. Many of us picked up on what appeared to be teases dropped in the very first trailer for Part 3 that arrived right at the end of Part 2 last October. The trailer was mostly made up of conceptual, computer-generated images hinting at events to come, one of which featured a prominent upside-down A, followed quickly by the almost neon blue outline of a pair of wings. This led many of us, myself included, to speculate that Uryu was indeed getting a Quincy Vollständig, something that many of the sternritter had already wielded prior to him in the arc, a real highlight of their characters and abilities, and yet the fact that he didn't have one was made even weirder when you consider that he was the originator of the Quincy's full power in the first place, being the only Quincy to use the Let's Steal on-screen and way earlier than the Thousand Year Blood War arc to boot. But what did we actually see in the episode itself? How did this sequence unfold, and what can it tell us? I made a video not too long ago arguing that the anime was fixing Uryu by emphasizing his conviction to the Vandenreich, and that having him kill Senjumaru would be the ultimate capstone to that, and well, here we are. But the manner in which he killed her was truly surprising. After he breaks free, initially Senjumaru manages to ensnare Uryu in her bankai, capturing him and stringing him up by fabrics emblazoned with his own destiny in some wonderful imagery. With Uryu trapped and helpless, Senjumaru lifts her Shikai Shigarami to the back of his neck and prepares to kill him with a single jab. As Senjumaru slips the needle into Uryu's flesh, Uryu's eyes suddenly widen, and we see a single shot of a droplet of blood splashing upon a pure white background before suddenly an immense light begins to pulsate from within Uryu. When we then return to this fight, Uryu has freed himself from Senjumaru's bankai. The anime makes it look like he used the incredible power released from his Vollständig in order to escape, but we later see that it appears he's actually used his Schrift the Antithesis, though more on that later, as I'm left wondering what was the point in the Vollständig's activation to begin with, and I'm not entirely sure it's quite so clear-cut. So we'll get to that in a moment, as I do have some theories. Here, though, we see that as Uryu's newfound wings erupt from his back, his power is actually stemming from his heart, and that's made very explicit by design. His heart is flashing and racing with light, and seems to be the source of his wings, as that light is flowing backwards through him. And of course, as we know, when a Quincy is struck by Yhwach's Owl's Valen, it essentially stops their heart with a piece of still silver. So it is all connected. Senjumaru nonchalantly wonders if Uryu is using the power of a sternritter, which I do think here means Vollständig specifically. But interestingly, Uryu is struggling to control his own strength. His eyes flash with electric-like power as he can barely contain the energy within himself. This is awesome, and now it makes a lot more sense as to why this particular shot of Uryu's eyes has been featured so prominently in the marketing and also in the new opening. It's got nothing to do with Bleach Vein as many of us thought. Instead, he's actively fighting against his own power to keep it contained. We know, of course, that Vollständig can tire some Quincy out, as we hear from the Bambis, and that it takes a while to seemingly learn how to actually use it in the first place. It's not something that just comes naturally to all Quincy. It is odd, though. So, does this scene, this shot of Uryu's eyes, have nothing at all to do with this particular shot from episode 24, where Uryu does seemingly activate Bleach Vein in his eyes, unless this is just supposed to be another earlier version of what's happening here, some foreshadowing towards more power emanating from him, but I don't see how that can be the case if Uryu's power was bolstered, if it was granted by the awakening of the Almighty. So these do seem to be two completely separate instances. Anyway, Uryu's crackling, fiery blue wings are seemingly spiraling out of control, but as he lands gracefully on the floor, it looks as though Uryu has managed to rein them in, stabilizing his wings. Senjumaru suddenly realizes that Uryu has switched places with her, and she now finds herself wrapped in her own bankai and left completely helpless. Honestly, and like I said, we'll get into the nitty-gritty of what may or may not be happening here, but now that we are actually potentially seeing the antithesis be used in a big way, it really does open up a whole can of worms just by itself. Uryu's power really can switch people into any scenario. I mean, how is Senjumaru actually being held prisoner by her own bankai, considering that she is still technically the one in control of it? It's not like Uryu stole her bankai and used it against her, she is using it, so that is kind of weird. Couldn't she immediately free herself the moment she realized she was trapped? I mean, it really does seem like Uryu's power quite literally places a target into whatever position they are being swapped into, and there's nothing they can do about it. Because there was no way for Uryu to escape, there's no way for Senjumaru to escape either. Unless this isn't the antithesis, which is, again, something we'll get into a bit later. Either way, Uryu kills her with a well-placed shot through the heart, and I've got to say, there is something really satisfying and cool, as macabre as that is, about seeing Uryu finally kill a Shinigami. It kind of feels like it's been on the cards ever since his battle with Mayuri. It feels like potential fulfilled in regards to a character arc, a character path that Uryu eventually turned away from. And for Senjumaru to even name-drop Mayuri during their duel was a great touch too. And then Uryu himself references Mayuri by telling Senjumaru that on his pride as a Quincy, he will kill her, and this time he actually manages it. After Uryu deals the killing blow, however, his power begins to go haywire once again, lightning shooting from his eyes before he doubles over, collapsing to one knee. The power continues to surge through him, his eyes turning red for a brief moment before he's finally able to disengage his Vollständig. Standing to his feet, Uryu clenches his right fist, his blut continuing to course through him, seemingly against his will, and the markings on his hand take on a rather peculiar appearance. So, what does all of this mean? It's a tricky one, but it does seem like in this very moment, Uryu's Quincy Vollständig activates for potentially the very first time. And if that's true, getting to see a sternritter realize their Quincy holy form for the very first time is a really nice addition. In my opinion, when Uryu is stabbed initially by Senjumaru, the imagery of the droplet of blood represents the droplet of Yhwach's blood that Uryu drank in order to become a sternritter and have a shrift engraved upon his soul. It's as though in this moment, the reality of that power is finally activating. Sure, Uryu has used the antithesis to great effect previously, but now the full strength of the power that his king bestowed upon him has been unleashed, perhaps in conjunction thanks to the awakening of the Almighty, and that results in his wings. Of course, all Quincy are connected to Yhwach through their blood, through his blood that they drink, and so when Yhwach's full power is finally awoken, perhaps the full power of Yhwach coursing through their veins finally awakens at the same time, and that's what the droplet of blood signifies. Now, I am only speculating here, but really the only other time we've seen blood imagery of this kind in the arc previously has been when Yhwach spilled his own holy blood onto the dish from which Uryu drank in episode 14. There's definitely a strong connection to Yhwach here regardless, as you might expect. Earlier in the episode, at the moment of the Almighty's awakening, the Schutzstaffel are seemingly set free from Senjumaru's bankai as the very tapestries themselves are burned away by a powerful blue flame, not unlike the blue flame that burned Waco Mundo. Uryu falls from his prison, seemingly initially unconscious perhaps, and again his heart is brimming with power in this moment, as though the Almighty has stirred something within him. But more curiously, as he stands, his eyes flicker with a red glow, something that even Hashwolf takes notice of, meaning he can sense this in a different portion of the bankai to Uryu. And so, logically, the conclusion that we come to is that in this moment, Uryu has been bestowed with a portion of the Almighty as well. Whether Yhwach did this on purpose or not is currently unknown. Were the other Schutzstaffel members given this same privilege? Personally, I doubt it. But it's still unclear how they actually escaped Senjumaru's bankai at all. Was it through their own power being enhanced by the activation of Yhwach's Almighty? Did he grant them even more strength yet again? Or did Yhwach simply break them all free with his own strength? But that's more for the episode review. Right here, when Uryu first releases his Vollständig, the familiar church bell motif rings out, implying that yes, this is indeed Uryu's holy form, but immediately, something isn't quite right. He doesn't have a halo, for starters, meaning this can't really be a Vollständig, at least not one in its entirety. And so that really reinforces the idea to me that this is perhaps the very first time Uryu has ever been able to actually use this power, and I imagine it won't be the last time we see it. In fact, I imagine Uryu's Vollständig will grow and evolve throughout the rest of the arc now until he has a fully completed version by the end. And what's up with Uryu's wings? They're not really like any other wing in the series. Rather than being a solid, defined shape as with the rest of the Sternritter, They're a mass of glittering particles, essentially, like a flame or just a stream of power escaping his body. If I had to guess, I'd say Uryu's wings are supposed to be a reference to the wing he bore in his Let's Steal, which also appeared as an unrefined flickering flame, and this is just how it looks in the 1000-Year Blood War arc style, but perhaps here he'll eventually solidify them as his Vollständig evolves over time. It's also possible that every time a sternritter first activates their holy form, this is what it looks like. And finally, after Uryu manages to restrain his power back within his body once more, he clenches his fist, and Bleach again appears upon it, still surging somewhat out of his control. But there is again something interesting about this. Not only is it Uryu's right hand that he's looking at, but the design of Bleach vein on his hand seems to take on the appearance of an eye, even if only briefly. And the right arm of the Soul King, Mimihagi, also bears an eye on the outside of its hand, unlike Pernida, the left arm, which has it on its palm. Now, of course, Uryu doesn't suddenly wield Mimihagi or anything like that, but I do suspect it is supposed to be further evidence that Uryu now houses some part, some power of the Soul Kings, likely a portion of the Almighty as we already speculated. I'm not entirely sure if it works like this or not, but could Uryu now have access to the fourth and final iris of Reio? Yhwach has 3 irises per eye, and so does Hashwolf when he wears the Mask of the Ruler at nighttime, so what about the missing last one? Of course, Mimihagi has only a single iris, while Pernida has 2, so Uryu may have found himself on the bottom rung of the almighty hierarchy, but on the hierarchy all the same. And in fact, before we go, there is that one last point that I wanted to bring up, something I've been alluding to throughout the video. What if Uryu didn't use the antithesis here at all? I know that sounds weird, as both he and Senjumaru have found themselves in essentially reversed positions and all, except it's not quite right. As I mentioned earlier, it feels like Uryu's Vollständig activating is what breaks him free, and if he did use the antithesis on Senjumaru, then why isn't she in the exact same pose, the exact same position that he was? Wouldn't she also be hanging by her arms, rather than completely wrapped up in a now inescapable fashion? And presumably, if she were hanging by her arms, she would have noticed what had happened earlier too. Uryu would have been right in front of her in the same way that she was, holding a weapon to her. Don't forget that the antithesis completely reverses the positions of any 2 objects identified by Uryu, so there shouldn't be any change in the way they appear. It's also a little suspect that Senjumaru doesn't seem to realise what's going on until it's far too late, almost as if it happens instantaneously. She says to Uryu, "How do you intend to escape my bankai?" After which Uryu then immediately says that she is the one trapped in the bankai instead, to which that suddenly, seemingly, becomes real. To me, the way this scenario plays out feels much more akin to the Almighty than it does to the antithesis. But then that, in turn, would mean that Uryu has gained the power to alter the future, putting him ahead of Hashwolf on our almighty hierarchy. I don't know, I'm not sure, it probably is just the antithesis, but I thought I'd throw that extra wrinkle in there as well for the sake of discussion. And then ultimately, how could all of this play into his Vollständig? Unfortunately, while I've tried to answer and cover as much as possible in this video, there is still just so much about Uryu and his current standing that we don't yet know. But hopefully we won't be waiting too long to find out. Based on the last trailer we got and knowing what chapters we're currently on, I think we might potentially see Ichigo versus Uryu as early as episode 29 perhaps, so it's all happening, and it's all happening fast. Alright guys, but that's it for the video. As always, I really hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you took something of value away from it as well. Like I said, this is just an intermediary video before we get to the full episode review, but I really did want to talk about this, as it has been drumming up a lot of conversation online. Does Uryu have a Quincy Vollständig? Is this the first time he's ever used it? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below regarding this entire sequence. How does it work? Does Uryu now have the Almighty? Is it the Almighty or the antithesis that he uses to defeat Senjumaru? I'd love to hear all of your thoughts on all of this down in the comments below. And as always, we're going to end the video by saying a massive thank you and giving an enormous shout out to my wonderful supporters over on Patreon, without who I simply wouldn't be able to keep doing this. So I really do appreciate your support. And if you love what I do here on YouTube and you want to take the support from me and the channel another step further, thank you. By visiting the link in my description, becoming a Patreon supporter at the $1 a month tier, you too can get your name in the credits of every video like this. And at the $2 or higher a month tier, you can get every single video I release absolutely free of baked-in YouTube ads. Alright guys, well that's it from me. Until next time, thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you later. I'll see you then.